Welcome to Deep Dive. It's a monthly online webinar where First Things First Okanagan presents different perspectives on climate solutions for our communities and for the whole world. Here in Penticton, we're on the traditional unceded territory of the Seal Okanagan people, and we're very grateful to live on this beautiful land. The word Penticton is an Enciltian name, Penticton, which loosely translated is a place where people have always been living all year round. And it is a beautiful time of year here. The blooming Saskatoon trees are covering the hillsides, as is the golden balsam sunflower. The Meadowlark Nature Festival begins in a few weeks, and there's an opportunity to learn about the land with local naturalists and knowledgeable Okanagan seal guides. So I encourage you all to go on the Meadowlark Festival website and have a look at all the programs there. And actually, we're sponsoring a tour and actually also offering a tour. So Sue will be talking more about that at the end of the program. So do check out the Meadowlark Festival website, and there is an opportunity to learn about the land, the values and beauty of this land from seal guides. And I'll turn things over to Sue to introduce the topic and speaker for this evening.
Great. Thanks, Margaret. And hi, everybody. As our climate warms and weather patterns change, drought will become an increasingly serious issue. And although we have large lakes in the Okanagan and a seemingly abundant water supply, water resources are finite, and climate change, along with the growing population, make it essential that we carefully manage this precious resource. One way we can conserve water and also make gardening less work is by growing plants that thrive in dry climates. And this will be the focus of Eva's talk tonight. Some of you may already know Eva Durance. She's a longtime Penticton resident and has been involved in many local environmental and agricultural initiatives. She and several friends developed the Penticton Farmers Market. She's a noted naturalist, especially botany and birds, and was instrumental in getting Basso Lake's hugely popular bird blind rebuilt. Eva's interest in nature and wild spaces led her to learn about landscape design, and she obtained a diploma from the prestigious Institute of Garden Design in the UK. She's used that knowledge to increase local understanding of the importance of xeriscape design, which uses native plants that need less water to thrive. Eva developed a native plant nursery, and she wrote the definitive book on the subject, which is called Cultivating the Wild, Gardening with Native Plants of BC's Southern Interior and Eastern Washington. And for those of you who haven't seen the book, it's an excellent resource. I've given copies of it to several of my gardening friends over the years. If you would like to purchase a copy from Eva, you can contact her through us. First Things First has an info@ email address. And the copies are $25 or $20 if you can pick it up in Penticton. So tonight, Eva will go over the main principles of creating low input gardens and landscapes. And she'll talk about watering, mulches, and plant choice. Before I pass it over to Eva, just a reminder that we'll have a moderated Q&A after her talk. So if you have any questions or comments, please just type them into the chat. And with that, I will turn it over to you, Eva. Go ahead, please.
Thank you very much, Sue and Margaret. And welcome to everybody. This is a wonderful response to obviously a very hot topic at the moment. I have a series of PowerPoint slides, which Laurie, thank heavens, is handling. And I'm going to go through them fairly quickly because this is a huge topic, and I could probably spend the whole 45 minutes on about two parts of it. So I hope that at least some aspects of it will apply to your situation and will be helpful for you. So I call it adapting your garden for a changing climate and taking a leaf or several from nature. Next, Laurie. So these are the topics that I will, as I say, rather quickly go through, but the need for resiliency in our gardens and built landscape. I'll use the term gardens because it's easier, but landscape, our built landscapes are everything around our homes, our public buildings, our parks, covers the whole gamut. I'll quickly go through the Xeriscape principles, and then talk more about native plants and the benefits to us and to wildlife, and the benefits in having them in a garden. Adapting an existing garden, which you can do without huge outlay. And then if you're establishing a new garden, how to approach that. And then at the last, I have a series of slides on native plants that are suited for gardens, that do quite well in our gardens situations, and also that are available in nurseries. So Sue touched on this, why change how we garden? Obviously we're having hotter and drier summers and falls. And this has become clear over the last few years that we need to change our whole approach to gardens and the built landscape so that they can better withstand the changes in the weather patterns, such as hotter and drier summers and falls. The wild swings in temperature, remember October, November 2022, when it went from summer to winter in about 3 days. The heat bomb of a couple of years ago. Lowers the dramatically lower snowpack we have this year, and snow in the lower valley for insulation on plants, and also our need to use much less water than we have in the past. There's a comment that was made in a CBC program, and I'll give you the citation for that in a moment, and I like this comment: the higher the biodiversity, the greater resilience there is. So keep that in mind, that in our gardens, what we need to be aiming for is a much greater range of biodiversity in all ways than has been standard in European style gardens. According to the Okanagan Basin Water Board, the second highest use of water after agriculture in the Okanagan is for lawns and gardens. And so there's a huge spike in the spring and summer of the use. And it's also, I think that it's as the habitat for wildlife declines, we need to look at ways in which we as individuals on our own properties can help to mitigate that a little bit, and to make the necessities of life for other creatures more available than they are rapidly becoming. Next. Oh, Xeriscape, yes. So this is the list of Xeriscape gardening principles that was developed, 40 years ago. I'd have to look again, in Colorado of all places, because they weren't running short of water, they were running short of facilities to process the water. And so the landscape designers and the architects in the city came up with this plan to reduce water use. And they called it Xeriscape, after the Greek word xeric, meaning dry. So number one, make a plan. And this is, it's important in any garden if you're designing it, to avoid making mistakes and costing yourself money and time and effort that you don't need to. But if you're going to do it as a xeriscape, or I use it xeriscape / naturescape gardening, but you need to make a plan of some kind so that things go in the appropriate places. You need to amend the soil, which generally means adding organic matter or making sure there's enough organic matter, and also that the tilth, or the porosity, the amount of water and drainage that there is in the ground is good. You usually want a lot. Some of our native plants will take an amazing amount of lack of it, but still having good tilth is important. Choose appropriate plants and plant them appropriately. And that means usually where they are planted. Consider lawn size and alternatives. I'll go into this in more detail. Mulch, leave no or little soil bare. And I say little because there's sometimes when you want to leave a bit of soil bare for various reasons. irrigate for optimum benefits and minimum use, choose appropriate garden care and maintenance, which will change over time, and consider having a water feature. The last item is one that I added years ago because particularly in our very dry climate, having even a very small water feature is, it's a magnet for birds and dragonflies and all other creatures, but it has other benefits in the gardens as well. So those are the basic principles of xeriscape gardening. Okay, on to native plants. I say the first choice because I think as we work more towards resilient gardens, I think the use of more and more native plants is going to become obviously the best choice to make. Now, again, with that CBC program, it was on What on Earth, if anybody else, I'm sure some of you listened to that, and What on Earth, and she had a couple of biologists there a couple of weeks ago, and it was really on this topic. And I was delighted that they came up with this definition because everybody struggles with what is a native plant. And they define it as a species that is evolved along with other living beings in a particular area. So that really limits it. Because you'll often see native plant used, the term used to, it's in North America. As I always say, every plant is a native plant somewhere, unless they're hybrids and ones that man has created. But all other plants are native somewhere, but it's whether they are useful and whether they evolved in a particular area. So because of that, having evolved in a particular area and under particular conditions, they are adapted to local conditions over thousands of years and through many climate changes, through wild swings. I mean, here they've gone, they came after the glaciers. They are also essential, and this is becoming more and more clear, that the native plants of a particular area are essential to provide the complete needs of the co-evolved critters. I call them critters because it covers all the other species. A lot of the non-native plants will supply some of those needs, but there isn't that close connection between what the critters need and what the plant has to offer. Native plants are critical for native pollinators, and we are losing those at a frightening rate. It also, as I mentioned before, it helps replace a little bit of lost habitat. And it's actually amazing how much, you may think, oh, I've just got a small backyard and it's not going to make much difference. But it can sometimes. I mean, I guess if you're in the middle of a city and everybody else around had just straight lawns and nothing appropriate in that respect, then it might not help. But certainly in our area, there's many places where even a small backyard that is made more friendly to other creatures can make a considerable difference. Native plants are easy care if they are planted in their appropriate conditions. They almost never have problems of disease. I've killed one or two from overwatering, but I don't think I've ever had any problem with insect damage or anything serious, and no disease or anything like that. They also help any non-native plants that you may plant along with them by attracting native insects. So they'll keep those non-native plants healthier as well. And they're very beautiful. And I also think that just on a more spiritual level, if you want, they provide a sense of place, that we're living in the Okanagan, we're not living somewhere else. And even some very beautiful gardens can, you look at them and think, well, this could be almost anywhere. So I think to me, that's an important reason for using some of the native species too. Now, I always say to people, though, when planting native plants, you do have to be aware of certain aspects of them. And oh, sorry, I want to go back. Can you Could you go back to that with the previous one, Lori, just for a moment? If not, it doesn't matter. I'll just talk on it. No, just leave this one then. I wanted to talk about that, about it being critical for native pollinators, especially bees. And I had this in my notes and I almost forgot about it, that on that CBC episode of What on Earth, the researchers made the comment that bees, they have found that bees are self-medicating on native plants against some quite common parasites that were the ones that they mentioned. And the parasites are native, they're not the introduced ones, but the bees will spend more time feeding off plants that contain alkaloids. And they mentioned nicotine and caffeine as two of these. So turtlehead was an Eastern North American species that they mentioned, and because they're both from Ontario. But I would be very interested to know what, I'm sure that goes on here too, but it'd be very interesting to know which plants bees are doing that on. And the name of that book, by the way, it's Loretta Johnson and Sheila Kola, and it's called The Garden for the Rusty Patch Bumblebee, Creating Biodiversity, and then there's a longer title. But I thought that, that just another example of why it's so important to have native plants, so that the needs of these other creatures are met better. Also wanted to mention just about them being, adapted to the conditions here, including changing climate. The winter of 22-23, and maybe a lot of you had this happen too, we found that even otherwise very hardy non-native plants, such as lavender, was knocked back severely or died. And I know a lot of the lavender that I have that has been just, gone through everything up to this point, 20-some years, a lot of it's dead this year. I've had some very hardy roses that I think they're mostly alive, but I've had to cut them right back to the ground level. So the roots are still alive. But I have yet to see a native plant that has died from the winter conditions. So they roll with the punches much better than even otherwise hardy non-natives. So back to this about native plants in your gardens. They are species, and as species, they haven't been tweaked for specific traits as domestic plants have, or selected for certain characteristics. So they will grow, set seed, and die back or go dormant on their own schedule, which is for them is survival. And which means in our climate that most bloom in early to late spring, early fall. I mean, this in the spring, we get this magnificent display of largely yellow flowers, which bees love, and blue, which is also attractive to them. And then we get the shrubs, but we have relatively few of the native plants that bloom, especially the herbaceous perennials that bloom in the summertime or even into the fall. We have some shrubs that do. So you have to remember that when you're putting them in your garden too, that they don't behave like the ornamentals that we are so used to. They are less adaptable to unfamiliar conditions than domesticated ornamentals or the non-natives that have been selected for certain characteristic too. And one example is that they generally react badly to fertile soils and overwatering. I even managed to kill a sage bush once by overwatering it, and inadvertently. It was under a drip on my house, but you have to be a little bit more, you have to learn a bit more about what they will tolerate and the best conditions to put them in and give them that in a garden to have the best success. You can mix native and non-native species and cultivars and varieties and hybrids, as long as you plant ones that have similar cultural requirements. And the way to increase biodiversity in your garden is to have this combination. As I say, the native plants, the native ones here, particularly herbaceous perennials, there are very few that bloom in the summer or fall, and right through the summer too. Gaillardia is one, the brown-eyed Susan is we'll keep going about. So you can mix the native and non-native and have that greater variety of color and shapes and forms, and sort of have the aesthetic side satisfied, as well as the adding to the native plant spectrum that you have. Avoid and just be very careful when you're looking in nurseries, because many of the cultivars and hybrids are infertile, and so they won't produce any nectar of any kind. And those that are bred for multi-petal forms are often not useful to pollinators because they actually can't get into them. So it doesn't mean that you can't have them in your garden, but just be aware that those are not going to be useful to the critters. I just want to say about native plants too. I highly recommend that you buy them from a native plant nursery. Almost none of the native plants in this area can be transplanted. And the ones from the nurseries are grown in somewhat artificial conditions. I guess they're stronger, and they'll be more satisfactory in the long run, as well as not taking any from our already depleted supplies in the wild. Seeds, you can get, if you know something of growing plants from seeds, there's nothing against getting some of the seeds, but be very careful that you don't deplete a particular area of seeds. You know, the balsam root, you can go and take some seed heads, and they will grow quite readily in your garden. In fact, I think with most of the native ones, the easiest one is to put them in the garden, and assuming that the quail don't get them, they will probably grow quite well. They may take a few years to produce flowers, but that's the other thing about buying them in the nurseries, that you're going to have color and seeds and nectar and all those things for the other creatures as well in shorter period of time. So I have a list at the end of the local nurseries. Sagebrush Nursery is the main one in the South Okanagan. XEN in Kelowna, in West Kelowna. The Okanagan Xeriscape Association also in Kelowna. And the Friends of the Gardens in Summerland, their annual sale, they have some native plants for sale, as well as a database on the plants. So you just just to sum that up, you do need to learn a bit more about the native plants, what they need, how they behave, than we typically have to if you're just going to a nursery and buying an ornamental. Oh, the other thing I was going to say about considerations in, yes, I've got it in the list there. It's the shrubs, native shrubs tend to be less tolerant of severe pruning. So they're more appropriate for an informal garden style than for a really formal garden. Avoid pesticides whenever possible, and if you do have an infestation, which, as I said, I have never had with any of the native plants or those around them, then be very, very selective, very careful with them. So, okay, now going on to adapting this for changing conditions. Besides planting some native plants, but this is one, if you have a garden, you don't want to start tearing it out and doing dramatic changes. In most cases, you can start using some of the xeriscape principles to tweak it and to over time make it into a more also more resilient, but also a more wildlife friendly garden. One is just to look at it in terms of those xeriscape principles that I listed and see how it stacks up that. One major thing is if you have a large lawn, to consider reducing it and or changing your maintenance methods. There's, if you look at your garden, you can in xeriscape principles, and there's lots of stuff on, there's lots of material online now on the details of xeriscape gardening. I have quite a bit on that in my book too. My book, although it is focused on native plants, because after doing design for a number of years, I realized people want a combination, and just my garden's like that too. The book also includes a lot of information on xeriscape in general and how to combine native and non-native plants in a xeriscape garden. One thing you can think of in your own garden is if you have some plants that are of a size that could be moved and they're not thriving where they are, then you might want to look at a more appropriate place and sort of rearrange plants so that plants that are drought tolerant are in one area, and those that perhaps need a little bit more shade or slightly different conditions are together. But on the lawn, if a lawn is larger than you actually use, and I think a lot of them are, you can consider taking it out, taking a part of it, and replacing it with gardens, or if that's going to be too much work and or other considerations dictate against that, you can put in low water and low care ground covers. My favorite is the native bearberry or kinnikinick. My whole, pretty much, I'd say about 2/3 of my backyard is kinnikinick, and half the side lawn too. Their side area is kinnikinick. And it's got, the flowers in the spring, the bees and other insects love it. And then there's the berries in the late summer and fall. Another ground cover that works very well as a alternate to lawn is woolly and prostrate thyme or veronica, the very low ones. Clovers. Or if you want to do something sort of quick and dirty and inexpensive, you can just use, you could take the lawn off and use an organic mulch. It's called bark mulch, but it isn't bark, it's chopped up remains of trees actually. And you can put paving stones through for a walkway. There's ways of doing that you don't have to plant a huge garden. But you get rid of the lawn, which is a monoculture and takes a tremendous amount of water. And if you're not using it, then you might find that you enjoy something else more from that. Mulch your gardens. I mentioned that first, that avoid leaving bare soil. You can leave, there's one reason for leaving a little patch of bare soil is that butterflies like to, what they call puddle in mud, and you can actually create a little spot for them there. And if you have plants that need to be able to spread, then you don't want to have a lot of mulch. You could have a light layer. But the mulch there's many uses for it. It obviously saves water because you're not getting the transpiration from the soil. It prevents a lot of problems with weeds, with invasive plants. And it also, as it breaks, especially the organic mulches, as they're breaking down underneath, because they are getting some water, then they will feed the soil organisms and they will increase the tilth of the soil as well. Another living mulch is just plants planted not so close together that they're crowding each other, but plants that when they're mature will actually shade the ground on their own. You can use some other mulches such as municipal compost, chopped or dried grass clippings from untreated lawns. If you don't use any yourself, you can use the clippings from it. You need to dry them because if you put them on wet, they will pack and essentially ferment, which is not good for the plants, the soil, and can be quite smelly too. You can use the chopped straw. I use chopped straw in my vegetable garden. It's probably not, I don't know, it's rather pretty. It's sort of a gold color, but it certainly works very well to prevent soil loss or moisture loss in the vegetable garden. The use of the inorganic mulches, rocks, stones, that sort of thing, be very careful how you use them. They can be very attractive, but they can absorb an awful lot of heat, for one thing. And if it's up close to your house, you can actually, I've heard figures of they can increase the temperature in your house by about 10 degrees, just by the reflection from rocks. But small stones and patterns through other mulches, yes, that can be very attractive and actually can be very good for certain ones like rock rose, the lovely low seed, not sedum, Ceodicus. It's a fleshy plant anyway. In the spring in the Okanagan, they like that kind of very of the sort of gritty soil, and some of the penstemons too. So you can use it, but just, I mean, these large expanses of rock are really not helping the plants that are in the garden. They're certainly not helping provide, a nice atmosphere for other creatures. So use it with care. Oh, there's another reason another thing with rocks. Rocks have this habit of collecting soil or the dust and stuff that's falling from the sky. And it's a great bed for weeds to start in. And then they're really hard to pull out. Which is a huge argument against landscape cloth. I won't get into that. That's a whole other topic. But landscape cloth can be a nightmare. Because of that, of things growing through it. In an established garden, if possible, choose native plants for any new plants that you put in. And if you can, plant a shade tree. There are some very nice, small, quite drought-tolerant shade trees. And one that I particularly like, which is native, is a tree form. You have to order them, but tree form Saskatoon. But there are some non-natives too that are quite drought tolerant, and the rain tree, the golden rain tree, is one that is their small shade tree. Use care methods like maintenance of your garden that improve your health and resiliency. As I mentioned, that avoid pesticides. If you have to, if for some reason there is, you really do have a serious problem, there are some ways in which you can actually wipe individual plants with the pesticide and avoid spreading it out. But as I say, I'm not very good on that topic because I've never had to use anything like that to save a garden. And I think in that too, that we need to change our attitude towards other creatures in our garden too. I don't know if you've seen with peonies in the by late spring, peonies have this, to me, a lovely sort of scalloped edge on all the leaves. That's because the paper wasps have nibbled on them. I think it's quite pretty, but I've heard people complain about that. So I think we need to, get more, just more tolerant of nibbling and of other creatures living their lives in our gardens, and appreciate them rather than just the aesthetic look of the plants. Make sure that plants are moist but not soggy when you're going into the winter. If they need to be moist or else cold, with or without insulation. Cold will really, it's really hard on the plant, can kill them. But if it's soggy, the same thing, because then you get ice buildup. So avoid late season fertilizing, because that just gives it soft growth. And again, it is not, the plants don't go dormant as well. And they have this soft growth that is very susceptible to cold and wind. And I would avoid commercial fertilizers as much as you can. There's nothing about native plants. They really don't need high fertility. And as I mentioned, they don't like it. But if you add late season fertilizers of commercial kind, which is almost, to me, it's sort of like refined sugar in your diet. It's a quick fix, but it's not good for the plants. And it may delay dormancy and, as I say, that lush growth. Leave grasses, and stalks of plants uncut over the winter to provide food for birds, the seeds, and to catch and hold snow for insulation. And leaves, if possible, leaves from trees and shrubs should be left until warm weather in spring, so that overwintering pupa and insect eggs aren't destroyed. I shudder to think of the millions of insects that never get a chance to reproduce, because we have this mania for cleaning up all the leaves in the fall and the spring, really early, late winter. I think even if you took them off and put them in a pile and left them, they'd probably be better than putting them in bags and sending them to the landfill. And then, as I say, add a small pond or seasonal water feature if you can, and that can be as small as a bird bath. One of those little, what do you call the Japanese water, what do they call those? I forget now, but anyway, where the water goes up and down in it. Sprays, birds love the sprays. Yeah. Okay, I see my time is going on here. So I just want to mention something about a new garden, establishing a new garden. This is a huge topic, but basic thing I think is to follow Xeriscape, naturescape principles. And in your soil preparation, making sure that the organic matter is good and there's good drainage. I don't really worry about the fertility as such. Native plant species throughout the garden, not exclusively, but spread throughout, so that there is, I suppose, a slight semblance of a habitat there. And plus useful non-native perennials, shrubs, and trees. And then I mentioned the water feature. Just want to make a few points on that. Back to this about soil preparation. Good additions to our soils, whether they're what I've always had clay soils. So that's what I know the best dealing with, but save and sandy soils. Your own compost or municipal compost. Composted manures, especially horse, and there's lots of that around here. It is very mild. You can actually put it fresh on plants and it won't burn them, but you can dig that in. That's an excellent source of organic material and will loosen the soil. Please do not add peat or sphagnum moss. it's there are two reasons. One is that the destruction of wetlands in the mining, and it really is like commercial mining of the peat and sphagnum moss, is destroying the wetlands, and it's also hydrophobic. It doesn't like water. So if soil that has a lot of peat in it gets dry, it is extremely difficult to get it to moist again. And so you can have plants that are suffering from lack of water just because they've got this dry peat in the soil around them, and you may not even know what is wrong if it's, if it's underneath. So I really would avoid that. A friend just told me about a new product for soil, and it's waste wool. It's the wool that's left over when they make yarn. And this company in, I think it's Vernon, is now producing a product from it called, and if you could just Google waste not wool, waste not wool .com, you'll see it. It's pricey, but if you live close by and didn't have to pay the shipping, it might be. And then it's a lot of nutrients in it, and aeration, and holds water. So it's an interesting new product. I hadn't heard of that. So I think I'm going to leave it at that so that we have some time for questions. And there's the list of the native plant sources and information. Oh, I just wanted to make one comment about the last one. Again, this is something I only came across. Can we go back to that last slide, Laurie? Thank you. Birds Canada has just launched a website called Gardening for Birds. And it's a work in progress, but there's an awful lot of interesting information on there already. It's a little bit thin on information for the Okanagan specifically, and I've emailed them with some suggestions for it. But I think in the long run, it's going to be a very useful resource. Okay, do you want to just run through those, Laurie, and yeah. B on the Oregon grape, yes. I just want to make one comment about the sumac. In my design work, I would suggest people who had a slope that needed to be stabilized by sumac, and they would look in horror. I hate sumac. And I'd say, you're talking about the staghorn sumac from the east, which is what they were in most cases. But the smooth sumac we have here is much smaller. It suckers like crazy, as all sumac do. However, it is marvelous for holding banks and in an area where you want something that is going to do exactly that, to sucker and cover the ground quickly. Okay, thanks. There's the kinnikinick. I didn't have a picture with the berries, but they're bright red. And this is the back of my yard, which the grasses, I just realized the grasses are kind of covering up the kinnikinick. But from where those grasses are right up to the house is pretty much solid bearberry. Penstemon, if you want hummingbirds, plant penstemon. And we have, well, there's another two in the next slide. We have some native ones here that are available, but there are lots of non-natives and also ornamentals. And the hummingbirds, they all seem to be have the nectar that the hummingbirds love. So I mentioned the gaillardia is one that will bloom right through the summertime, and so it's a really nice one to have. And there's lots of cultivars of that too. Snow, I was going to mention this about the other buckwheat, the snow buckwheat and the sulfur buckwheat, parsnip leaf buckwheat, I should say, lower elevation are, according to a man who's a lepidopterist, said that they are the two most important native plants in the Okanagan for butterflies. And obviously the milkweed. Yes, these are not native plants that these two critters are on, but I love that with the little tree frog in my in the pond lily in my little pond. This is my the biggest yard in the summer, and it is to say a mixture of native and non-native. That's a Douglas maple at the back that's in the fall color, and I've got Scholar's willow at the right here, and yeah, it's a big mixture of native and non-native, but it's busy with critters all year round. Thank you.
Eva, we don't
Yes.
we don't have any questions. So maybe we could start with I see a question coming in now, but there was a woman at the beginning that was
Yes.
concerned about weed invasives in a very dry area. What would you give her in advice now in terms of trying to establish native plants, and yet she's got a ways to go?
It is difficult when the weeds you probably have mostly annual weeds, and that's the good news. Because most annuals, the seeds only last a year or so. So if you can get them, ideally cut them, pull them before they set seed, then for a couple of years, then you will be able to knock back the populations. I don't know how large an area this is. On a smaller area, you can essentially you can smother them with mulch, with heavy layers of mulch. I hesitate to say use plastic for a lot of reasons. One is that with the heat from plastic, especially black plastic, you can kill the soil organisms. So you're kind of helping yourself in one way and harming another. I think it's boring and it's hard work, but if it's not too enormous an area, I think pulling the weeds, preventing the seeds bank from getting established, and using some kind of a mulch, probably what they call, as I say, bark mulch, to keep them from germinating.
Margaret and Eva, may I say something? Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Thank you.
It's a problem I came across an awful lot in my design work, and it was always a major problem.
I just love the photos you showed me of your garden. It's very inspiring to me, and I need inspiration at this point in my life. I did want, before we go back to weeds, I wanted to ask, I have a lot of lovely blue bunch wheatgrass in the back, because the back of my lot is natural, and that's what I want to get in the front. And so it was suggested by a friend of mine to transplant them into the front, and
No,
it won't work.
You can get sagebrush sells plugs, which
Yes.
are relatively inexpensive to buy, because they literally are. There's like a little 1-inch plug, and the grasses are at a very early stage of their growth.
Mm-hmm. Is
So
it too
you can
late
get
now
a fair
to do
you
that?
can get a fair number that way. Yeah.
Yeah. Is it too late now
No. They just started. Yeah.
because
However, if you have a weed problem, I don't want to go too along with this, but I would say work first at getting the weeds under control, and planting in the fall is much better here than
Mhm.
in the spring.
Yeah.
Because if you plant in the spring, you're having to maintain young plants with a lot of water, relatively a lot of water, because although they're drought tolerant, when they're young, they're going to need some care and they're going to need the water. So if you can hold off to the fall, that is the best time to plant in our climate.
Yeah. Now, the other question is about ponderosa pine, because I do get little seedlings here, but they might be in inappropriate places. Now, I did have actually Sagebrush Nursery come, and they dug a big hole and they put 3 little ponderosas on my place. 2 of them have survived. One of them didn't, because it was probably planted in too rocky a ground. Now that I noticed when I was digging for another place for a ponderosa, that the land here is very rich in a kind of peaty substance, which is really the needles from the ponderosa pine here. It's a beautiful soil. But you said don't use peat moss.
Well,
What about
I
corn?
would say don't add peat.
Yeah.
And they sell, the nurseries do sell peat from locally, and mined locally or dug locally, but also the dry stuff, and it is really
Yeah,
bad. But
I think so.
yeah, I think Margaret had there was another
There's
question
another
here.
question coming up.
Yeah.
Margie Kokla has a question. If you want to unmute, Margie. There's a question about white clematis. Oh, you're muted still, Margie.
Sorry. Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. I purchased the white clematis because you had suggested it, Evis, and I loved it. But I purchased it in the year we had the heat, like 40 plus temperatures, like a couple years ago. And I wondered if I did possibly water it too much, because I bought it in the spring. And so it was fine last year, but then this year it seems to be totally dead, unless it's going to come out later. It looks really dead.
Yeah, I don't despair, because I know everything seems to be a little late this year. And I noticed my clematis, I have 2 clematis, one on the white clematis, one on the bank and one on the back of my place, and they're just barely starting.
Okay.
So I wouldn't give up on it yet.
Okay. All right. Thanks.
You may find you have to cut it back a bit, but I'd be surprised if the roots aren't still alive. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
I have a question if nobody else
No,
does. And
Bonnie,
that is,
I think Bonnie
yeah.
has a few questions.
I think we just answered those, I believe. Bonnie was just speaking before Marty.
No, actually I wasn't. It was someone else.
Bonnie,
But
oh.
I
Pardon
can
me.
I can
Yeah.
ask
Go
them questions.
Go
I
ahead,
typed them
Bonnie.
out, like in the chat, but I'm happy to narrate them. Thank you so much, Eva, for the presentation. It was really helpful.
Good.
So I have three different questions here. One of them is about fire safety and mulch. I live in downtown Kamloops, and so there's some like safety in that, but there's also, I live at the edge of downtown, so I am kind of at an interface with the grasslands. And so I'm wondering what your thoughts are. Like, my dream is to, I mean, I do have a lot of arborist wood chips around my house, and I'd like to replace more of my lawn with it, but I've been sort of hesitating because of fire concerns. So curious what you have to say about that. I have questions about kinnikinnick, like if you can add it to an existing lawn, or if you need to like rip the lawn up completely for it to grow. And then lastly, native pond plants. I have a pond for my honeybees that is just still, like I can't aerate it. Honeybees won't come to it if it's not like a still pond. So curious about what native pond plants you might suggest.
Oh, okay. I'll start at the end because I just realized if you want to have a small pond and you want to attract native critters, do not put fish in. You won't have any dragonflies or frogs or anything. So, but now I honestly I don't know what native pond plants we are. Yeah, I really don't know which ones are available. I would check at the nurseries and see if they, or check online. They'd probably have all their plants listed, but you could just phone them and ask about that. I must admit the pond lilies I have in mine are not native, in part because my pond is very small, and I know the native pond lily is very large. So I kind of deliberately made that choice.
Yeah, do your pond lilies survive the winter?
Pardon?
Do your pond lilies survive the winter? Like, do they come back on their own the next year?
Yes, they do. Yes, they do.
Okay.
And they weren't supposed to be hardy. And I mean, it's only like 15 inches deep, the pond. And for the first year I took them out, and it was just such a horrible job. And that I thought, heck with this, they're either going to live or they're not. And they live. No problem at all. So
that's helpful. Yeah, thank you.
yeah. So yeah, you see that. Sorry, what was your second? Oh, yes, about no, kinnikinnick will not grow in lawn.
Okay, got it.
Yeah, you have to take that. And the easiest way, if you have any large amount, is if you've got some teenagers who need the job, some young, strong young people, and rent a turf remover from a rental company.
Okay.
And it takes off like down so that it gets the roots too, so that you don't have it coming back.
Okay.
You can do the lasagna thing, but if you want to get rid of it in a hurry and start something, then I highly recommend those machines. Yeah.
Okay.
And you had one other
the
question.
fire safety question.
Oh, the fire question. That I know it's a bit my feeling is, if you've got a wooden building, you don't put wood up against it. You don't have plants right against it either if you're in a high fire zone. But mulch is not, in my experience, mulch is not, it wouldn't be flammable because you are watering it. It is getting watered and it is breaking down. And it does get kind of packed down too. So it's not this tinder dry stuff that you get the impression that it is. So, I mean, if I were living out in the forest, no, I wouldn't have that probably. I'm not sure what I would, but
if I could interject, I just
to
the
yeah.
audience.
Oh, I was just gonna, yeah. I was just going to say the other thing is to have not probably more important is don't have conifers right up against your house.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah,
it's just
don't have
have
junipers, that sort of thing, and have lots of plants that are healthy and deciduous. Which is Margaret, yes.
I'm just putting in some new bark mulch, and so I actually phoned the RDOS Fire Smart coordinator here at the regional district, and he said, don't have bark mulch within 10 feet of your house. So you can have it around the yard, but definitely not up against any wooden structure, patios or house, and try and keep a sort of a 10-foot space.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess that's yeah, I have like that's basically the only place that my grass is within 10 feet of my house. So I'm like, ah, I want to replace it out, but it's yeah, it feels like such a tension, the what's good for the soil and the plants,
Yeah.
and then this advice that we're getting from fire safety people about
Well, yeah, I think if you know, if you're going to replace lawn that's within that 10-foot range, then I would look for things like kinnikinick or
Yeah.
clover or the thyme, a living mulch.
yeah. Okay. Okay, I'll do that.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. This has been really
You're
useful.
welcome. Yeah, it's difficult because every property, I say, you know, you can't, there's no cookie cutter recipes for landscapes, especially in this area. It's everyone is very individual.
I think we'll pass things. Thank you very much, Eva. We'll pass
thank
things
you.
over to Sue to mention a few more things before we wrap up this evening.
Okay.
Yes, thank you, Eva. That was excellent. Lots of good information. Just a reminder
Thank
to
you.
everybody that we will be sending out an email with the recording. So if you missed anything, you can listen to it again. And we also encourage you to share the recording with your family and friends. Just a couple of quick announcements. On Thursday, May the 2nd, First Things First will be holding its annual general meeting. It'll take place at 6:30 in Penticton Senior Center on South Main Street. So join us to hear what we've been up to this past year. We're also having a guest speaker from the BC Wildfire Service, Beau Michon, who will be talking about climate warming and the wildfire outlook. This year, First Things First is also participating in the Meadowlark Festival, as Margaret mentioned. And this is something we haven't done before. We've teamed up with Noble Ridge Winery. And we're going to offer a 2-hour event on Sunday, May the 20th, that includes family-friendly education about day-to-day climate solutions and a vineyard tour about sustainable growing practices. Benoit Gauthier, who is the director of winemaking and viticulture, will be the one leading the vineyard portion of the tour, and he's very enthusiastic and knowledgeable. So we encourage you to check out that tour and also the other Meadowlark festival tours that are coming up on the May long weekend. And the last thing is our next deep dive, which will be Thursday, May the 16th, on the topic of water in the Okanagan. We'll have 2 presenters from the Okanagan Basin Water Board. Anna Warwick-Sears will explain how water is managed in the Okanagan, and Corinne Jackson will be talking about what people can do to help conserve water. And as always, the registration information will be posted on our website, and we'll also have it in our next newsletter. And if you don't already receive our monthly e-newsletter but would like to, you can sign up on our website, or we'll also have the link in the email that'll be coming out in the next day or so. And I think that's it for announcements, unless Margaret or Laurie have something to add. And if not, we'll just call it a night.
No, thanks everyone. Thanks to Eva. Perhaps if you have some other thoughts, I know that Eva's book is in the library, and you can always get a hold of her through us, through info@firstthingsfirstokanagan.com to order her book, or to sneak in an extra question.
Thank you very much, everyone, for coming, and we look forward to seeing you in May.
Thank you.
Enjoy the spring.